This girl is only 14 years old, but she had already been pregnant twice. She came to the hospital due to abdominal bleeding during her pregnancy. Since an intimate examination was needed, the doctor asked the pastor who came with her to wait outside to avoid making his daughter feel embarrassed.
Daughter? Lindsay's my wife.
So the doctor had to question the legitimacy of the girl's marriage. However, the lawyer explained that it had been approved by the girl's parents and signed by a judge. The doctor suggested notifying the police or reporting the case to family services, but under Michigan law, everything was legal, leaving the hospital powerless. After the examination, the girl was diagnosed with uterine fibroids caused by her first miscarriage. Dr. Manning recommended chemotherapy, and if that didn't work, they would consider a hysterectomy. The pastor strongly objected, saying that chemotherapy would make the girl unable to get pregnant again. He insisted that the best course of action was to discharge her so she could carry the pregnancy to term. The girl demonstrated complete obedience. Sometime later, Dr. Manning visited the girl in her room. She explained that, according to the law, the girl had medical autonomy and could choose her own treatment. As for the man's claim that chemotherapy would make her infertile, it was completely unfounded. At that moment, the man returned to the room and pulled Dr. Manning outside. Recognizing the man's abusive behavior and mental control over the girl, Dr. Manning angrily berated him. The man, furious, began arranging her discharge. At this point, Dr. Will asked his colleague to handle the discharge paperwork while he quickly went to the girl's room. He asked if she had made a decision, reminding her that this was her last chance to choose. The girl said her mother had died at 19, and her great-grandmother had also died young. She believed her turn would come soon. It felt like a curse. She wanted to have the hysterectomy, but Dr. Will explained that early chemotherapy could effectively treat her condition and allow her to build a family without needing surgery. However, the girl emotionally admitted that she didn't actually want children. She wanted the right to make her own choice. So, Dr. Will prepared to take her for surgery. When the pastor found out, he angrily declared that the girl was his wife and that he had the right to make decisions for her. But Dr. Will presented the signed consent form for the surgery. The priest is so angry.
You will be diminished in the eyes of the Lord. Do you understand?
A man arrived at the emergency room. He demanded to be admitted to the psychiatric ward immediately, or he feared he wouldn't be able to stop himself from killing his wife. Dr. Charles then attended to him. The man said his wife was pregnant, and he was terrified that he might not be able to stop himself from harming her. He wasn't avoiding reality, nor was he anxious about the impending birth of their child, but he constantly had intrusive thoughts about killing his wife with a knife. These thoughts were driving him to the brink of collapse. His wife then explained that her husband was a gentleman, and with their baby on the way, she hoped he could help care for the newborn. She suggested that maybe the doctor just needed to prescribe some medication, and her husband could leave afterward. However, Dr. Charles and his assistant discussed that the situation wasn't so simple. They suspected the man was suffering from harm-related obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, and the violent thoughts he was having could eventually lead to real actions. Before releasing him, they decided he would need further evaluation and treatment. After the conversation, the assistant took the man to the treatment room. She decided to implement exposure therapy. She asked the man to close his eyes and imagine the scene of killing his wife. Then she instructed him to open his eyes, pick up a knife from the table, and imagine that she was his wife. The man held the knife and trembled at her. She used words to signal him to continue, but he put down the knife after a rational struggle. She told him that this proved he was a person with a conscience, not the cruel person he imagined himself to be. Although this helped treat the man's OCD, she was still strongly criticized by Dr. Charles.
What you just did in there was unbelievably stupid.
The doctor and his assistant were chatting in the car. A police car pulled up behind them. The doctor knew what was about to happen, so he told his assistant not to talk too much, and don't make any unnecessary movements. The police officer, using a broken taillight as an excuse, asked them to step out of the car. Once outside, the assistant started rambling like Deadpool, saying they wouldn't have been asked to step out if it weren't for their skin color. He added that they'd either be framed for stealing the car or for some other illegal activity.
Calm down, son. Oh, I'm not your son.
Then the cop drew his gun. Just then, a motorcycle sped by and knocked the officer out. The rider fled the scene. Without hesitation, the doctor began administering first aid to the officer. Later, he took the officer to the hospital. A colleague asked the doctor about the incident, questioning whether his position might be compromised. Despite the discrimination he faced, the doctor expressed his hope that the officer would recover. Soon after, the police came to the hospital to investigate the incident. The assistant angrily questioned their inquiry, insisting that if he and the doctor were white, none of this would have happened. He refused to answer any questions. Fortunately, the doctor arrived at the critical moment and resolved the conflict that almost occurred. Subsequently, the doctor completed the police operation without incident. The assistant doesn't understand why he's rescuing a guy that hurt him. It won't even change his mind, he said. His ethic is to do his best.
My excellence is the best revenge.
The assistant responded that even so, the officer would never change his views about them. But the doctor's final response:
When the world around me is irredeemable, I am a righteous man.
The woman collapsed in the park due to a drug overdose. Fortunately, she was discovered by a doctor in time. When she woke up, she immediately began frantically searching for her bag. The doctor went to retrieve it for her, and shockingly, inside was a baby. Upon examination, the baby was found to be suffering from severe neonatal abstinence syndrome. Luckily, the baby was discovered just in time. He would have only survived another hour outside. However, not long after, the mother quietly disappeared. A nurse mentioned that the baby's condition was critical, and losing his mother only made things worse. He wasn't responding to treatment and didn't even have a name. Dr. Helen, moved with compassion, decided to try and help him. Perhaps the baby sensed a motherly warmth as he stopped crying and shaking and slowly began responding to treatment. Dr. Helen never had a child of her own for medical reasons. At this moment, she even wants to adopt this child. But then Dr. Max informed her that the baby's father had come to see him. It turned out the baby's mother had been prescribed oxycodone after an injury, but had become addicted and couldn't quit. When the father left her, he didn't know she was pregnant. So when he received the call, he rushed to the hospital immediately. He was ready to take the baby home. Although Dr. Helen was heartbroken, she was happy the baby had found his father. She had already named the baby Zura, meaning light, symbolizing what a child brings to their parents. The father was also pleased that his son had been given such a beautiful name.